If you're getting value from working healthcare, I have a quick ask. Follow the podcast and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to the podcast. That simple action helps more physicians and leaders find these conversations and better understand how our healthcare system actually works. And that matters because we can't fix what we don't understand.
You ready? You got me running.
I am Meredith Hirsh, and this is Working Healthcare. Americans pay more for prescription drugs than anywhere else in the world. Even with insurance, the average person is still spending $1,100 a year out of pocket on medications. We spent about $467 billion on prescription drugs last year, and yet patients are still standing at the pharmacy counter being told no. So here's the question. If we're insured, if we're spending that much, where is the money going? That's what we're unpacking today. I just interviewed a friend of mine and somebody I do a little business with, Tesh Khullar. He spent more than 9 years at McKesson, one of the largest drug distributors in the country, leading oncology sales and account management. He then spent 6 years at Flatiron Health. He co-founded HouseRx, and he's now the founder and CEO of Prism TPO. He's working there to bring transparency to drug purchasing for independent practices. So he understands how drugs move, how they're priced, and where the friction happens. Tesh Khullar, welcome to Working Healthcare.
Thank you for having me all the way from California and live in the studio. This is fantastic.
I know. I'm very excited about that because you and I have known each other for a few years now.
Yep.
You had a conference in Orlando, and you're like, let's just do this live. I'll fly down. And then you're leaving out and scooting out back to California.
That's right. But this worked out perfectly.
This did. So Tesh, how did you even get into healthcare?
By complete accident. So out of college, I worked for a consulting company, Anderson Consulting, and they put me on a project, and it was the first distribution company in a community oncology space called Oncology Therapeutics Network. Then Enron hit, and I basically had to find a job, and that company kept me. So I started off on the technology side, got fascinated by the business side, and through various different roles at Oncology Therapeutics Network that got acquired by McKesson, I learned a lot about how the sausage is made and how pricing works in the marketplace. And then I have a personal story I can get into later on about what kept me in healthcare.
Well, I'd love to hear what kept you in healthcare because you were an executive at McKesson. Mm-hmm. You were there for about 9 years. You migrated a few other places, and you and I actually met because you are the co-founder of HouseRx, which is a medically integrated dispensing pharmacy in the oncology space, in the rheumatology space,
That's right,
which is where I fit in, and in the GI space. So tell me why HouseRx and what kept you in healthcare?
Yeah, so I was at McKesson. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I thought, okay, well, this should be very, very easy. We live in Southern California, plenty of access to providers. But between the navigation between her oncologist, her specialist, her insurance plans, the surge onc, the rad onc, it was extremely difficult. Forget about the cost side of it. It was difficult for her to navigate care, even having me, someone that was in the healthcare setting. So I said we had to find a better way. And back then, this was late in 2013, Flatiron Health was a new startup that was in the market, talking about bringing data to oncologists at point of care so they can make better decisions. In other words, you could get treated the same way at a community practice as you would at MD Anderson or at Cedars-Sinai. So that really, I gravitated towards that. So I left in 2014, led the providers. I had half the company at Flatiron Health. That got sold to Roche. And so I said that was a fantastic mission to get data at point of care. But then I realized it wasn't enough because so many drugs were now going to the pharmacy benefit side. So after a brief stint at Foundation Medicine, where I learned about the genomic space, I then knew Ogi, my co-founder from Flatiron, and said, you know what? Oncologists are dispensing right now, but they're doing it in a very poor way. Why don't we create our technology that'll help them do it and expand it to other specialties? Because I knew from my mom's experience, the best place for her to get treated was absolutely at the community oncology practice. So why can't we have that same experience in other specialties, which is why we formed HouseRx.
And doctors know the drug that they want to put a patient on.
Absolutely.
But it's often not the drug the patient gets to go on. That's because of a formulary.
Yes.
Describe who gets to choose the formulary for an insurance plan.
Yeah, it is. The PBMs run and control the formularies. And it's really interesting because this is only on the pharmacy benefit side. On the medical benefit side, as you know, Meredith, you can essentially use the drugs that your doctors think is best for the patient. You control that. Your physicians control that, but not on the pharmacy side. But manufacturers essentially pay PBMs to make sure that their drug gets a priority on formulary. And it is a money-making machine for PBMs to control those formularies and make sure that they understand which drugs they're going to approve and which drugs they're going to make extremely difficult to approve with something called a pre-auth. And pre-auth, you know this very, very well, are really there to control costs. And so the more pre-auths that you have, the more likely it is that you're going to just use the drug that they want, the one that PBMs make the most money on.
Let's talk about PBMs. Yeah. It is becoming part of our nomenclature now. Yes. Even in Congress, everybody knows what a pharmacy benefit manager is. Can you talk to me a little bit about the history? Like, when is the last time you heard what a PBM is? Because I know that I must have heard this term, I feel like it was even post-COVID. It seems like that's what my life is, right? Before COVID and post-COVID. I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago. And it took me a while to even figure out what it is. In fact, Dr. Maddie Feldman, who was one of my first guests ever on Working Healthcare, is a huge advocate for pricing transparency and PBMs, anti-PBMs. And she shared this information with me. But how do you put it into terms? Why did they even start?
You know, so they were an intermediary that formed. Actually, when they first formed, there wasn't a bad thing. You know, the government couldn't control the new kind of the huge kind of increase in oral therapies that was happening across all therapeutic areas, but in particular in the specialty setting. So they needed some entity to decide which drugs are therapeutically equivalent, which ones should they approve, and they didn't have the manpower, and nor do I trust the CMS to kind of do that themselves. So they outsourced it. They said, let's have these new kind of companies that became pharmacy management managers control essentially which drugs that they're going to be able to approve or not on the Medicare side. Now, then Medicare Advantage or Disadvantage comes along, and then you have them controlling it essentially for the entire market. So they're the ones that when they were independent, it was actually okay. The problem was PBMs then got gobbled up by insurance plans. And when that happens, now you have the person that's paying and really getting incentives to have the drug that they make the most money on getting approved for formularies. And that became an inherent conflict of interest, which is why we see the PBM has evolved to now, which is just a money-making machine for the insurance companies.
And there are 3 companies that are PBMs and handle the transactional care, right, for prescriptions throughout this entire country, 80%. And the 3 are CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, who is owned by Cigna, and we know CVS Caremark is Aetna. And then we have OptumRx, which is United Health Group. United Health Group, I bash them a lot, but I guess I bash it because I personally struggle with the understanding of healthcare, which should be a humanistic process or a humanistic profession or company, and now going into the area of mass conglomeration and extracting as much profit as possible. And they are the 3rd highest revenue producing company in our entire country. How did these 3 PBMs acquire 80% of the marketplace?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So when the Medicare Modernization Act happened, this is back in 04, 05, and then you saw the drastic increase in the cost of drugs. What these insurance companies realized is they needed to control both the horizontal flow of the patient and the vertical flow of the drug, because as these drugs were increasing in cost, the more they could control, the more money that was to be made. And as drugs skyrocketed, and I'll use oncology as a perfect example because that is the highest cost of therapy in all specialties, you see that these insurance companies were just ahead of their time. They said, I am going to, if I have the primary care physician all the way down to now the specialists that I essentially employ, then I will control which drugs are actually going to be administered. And by the way, if the physician decides to use a prescription drug, I have my PBM to make sure I can still make money there. Which, once again, it was them understanding where the puck was going and essentially creating and owning the whole ecosystem in which they were going to optimize and make the most money for. So look, this is America. I think companies exist to make money, and that's okay. But I think when you do it in a way where you don't put the patient at the center of the experience, that presents a problem. And now what we have is a patient experience. Forget about the financial cost for the patient. Their experience is one that is so disjointed. Going back to my mom, when she had breast cancer, she needed oral and IV therapy. Now, we were not able to get that oral therapy at the community oncology practice. We had to go through a PBM. So now she had her IV treatment right at her community practice, and she had to wait 2 weeks for her oral therapy to arrive at our door. And by the way, they say it's coming sometime in this day. It didn't arrive this day it was supposed to. So we were literally waiting, delay in care. It leads to way worse outcomes for the patient, let alone the experience of somebody that is older having to wait for therapy that they know is life-saving for them. And it was really, really difficult for me to see that. But that's what happens to a lot of patients across America that are forced to use these insurance-owned kind of ecosystems that you know really well.
How do PBMs make money? Who pays them?
Manufacturers. They primarily make it in a couple of ways. The primary one is for manufacturers because they control formularies. So I'll use an example of when the Amgen drugs, Neulasta, was going biosimilar. They went to these PBMs and said, in particular, one of them, and you guys can figure out which one this is. And they said, if I want to keep this drug on formulary, even post biosimilars coming out, essentially, what's it going to cost me? So they paid a lot of money to keep their drug on formulary. So as a biosimilar came out, which as we know, biosimilars, it's lower cost for the patient. The provider actually makes more money on it, which providers in the community need to make money in order to keep their doors open because you don't turn a patient away. So the fact that they did that was disjointed from how the patient experienced and what they had to pay, and also what the provider was actually making on it because they were forced to use a branded drug, higher cost, just because the PBM made more money because it got paid by the manufacturer. The second way they make money is essentially handling Medicare Disadvantage, and they get paid a fee, as we all know, from the Medicare to be able to kind of handle that on behalf of all of the Medicare plans.
When I do my advocacy work and go up to Tallahassee or go up to DC and we talk about PBMs, I ask our legislators, I ask our Congress, what do PBMs tell you? What is their side of the story that shows that they are essential and necessary and they should be making this kind of money? And what PBMs say is, we're costing the insurance world less money. We are costing Americans, Americans are getting to spend less money because of us. Do you buy it?
No, and for the simple reason that if that was accurate, then insurance premiums for patients should be going down over time when insurance companies acquire PBMs. But have you seen your premiums go down?
No.
And deductibles go down? Absolutely not. So if that happened, I would actually give them credit for it, saying, yes, you're lowering the cost of care and the patient experience is actually getting better, but that's not happening. So therefore, the two don't make sense. They don't jive with me.
So if I go to the pharmacy and a medication is not covered,
Yep.
Is that the PBM stating that it's not covered under the formulary?
It's not a preferred on the formulary. They really can't say if it's a medical necessity, they can make it harder for you to actually get it administered by putting a pre-auth in there, but they can't. And if they deny it, then there's an appeals process, as you know. But yes, it's the PBM that controls the formulary that is saying, you can't use this drug. It is not either medically necessary, or we have another preferred drug you should be using. So they're the ones that decide which drug actually is the one that is in network, that it will be approved in network and at the cost for the patient that is supposedly the least cost for them.
What are the chances of a patient getting a denial overturned if it is not the preferred drug on the formulary?
I mean, so I don't know the percentages off the top of my head, but the reason why I know it is a long, drawn-out process is because the physicians that are a part of the insurance companies that are looking at those appeals are not the specialists. So, like, for example, there's not a rheumatologist looking at your your appeals. It's a pediatrician. It's a physician, but it's not the same specialist, and so therefore they're not experts in the field, and they don't know whether or not it was okay for you to prescribe Actemra or not. So therefore, because they're not educated to make that decision, they're likely just going to delay until you decide as a provider, I'm just going to do something else because I can't wait any longer. The patient needs therapy.
I interviewed Boris Bakari, who you and I both know of Claimable, and he shares a story that during the California fires, his asthma flared up, and he's been on the same medication for 20 years, I want to say, this asthma medication. He goes to get a refill and they deny it and they state it's no longer on his formulary. He said, thank God I had enough money to pay for it out of pocket and then appeal. But it took 3 months to actually get that denial overturned for him. And if I recall correctly, it took about 3 months. And the drug was only about $250. When does a drug become preferred on the formulary or not preferred? Is there an amount or a benchmark of how much that drug sells for? Like, what about $5 drugs that are super cheap? Is it like $100, $200? Because $250 is not one of the drugs that we use in the world of rheumatology.
No.
So what is the benchmark as to when you have to actually create a formulary for an insurance company?
So, I mean, roughly speaking, I'm not sure if it's still the same benchmark, but for a while they used $1,000, which I'm not sure if it's increased or not. But in general, it's not about the cost of the drug, it's the profit that the PBM can make. But what's interesting and fascinating is a couple of years ago, Meredith, you have, and this is all publicly available information, Optum made more money than United Healthcare. So think about that. The PBM, which is owned by United Healthcare, made more money than the insurance side of the company. And why is it? Because they're optimizing profit, right? And once again, I'm not opposed to that, as long as it leads to lower costs for the patient, which we're still not seeing. But that was really fascinating that now a company they bought to control essentially what gets prescribed is making more money than the insurance company itself, which is the child making more money than the parent, which is fascinating.
Well, let's talk about that vertical integration, because United Health Group is one of those. It is the mammoth company.
Yeah.
So United Health Group is the umbrella. And you mentioned Optum RX as their PBM. Optum actually is the employer of 10% of physicians in this country. And then they have Change Healthcare, right? Which is their, what is that called? The
technology switch.
Thank you. Their whole technology program that literally pays providers, right?
Yeah.
And there isn't one area within the healthcare system that United Health Group doesn't have a stake in. How does this negatively or positively impact our cost as patients?
I think it's actually irrelevant about the cost that we pay. It is only the profits that they're going to make. This is what my mom at that time, we were under United Healthcare, and because her primary care physician was working with the oncologist who was in network, essentially they were controlling what drugs she was going to be able to get and how the mechanism of how she was going to be able to get it. So it did not lead to, if it was leading to better access, fantastic. It did not. Was it leading to lower costs? It did not. Was it leading to better overall patient experience? It was not. So whenever I think about why I want to do what I want to do and why I want to be kind of vocal about when we started Prism and why we wanted to do that is because this lack of transparency really leads to companies making more money, but not the patient experience getting better, which is very, very frustrating. And the only way we can solve this is if insiders that understand, how and who's making money in this chain expose it and do it in a way that is patient-centric.
How does this make it so difficult for independent practices to succeed?
It makes it extremely challenging. Let's put 340B aside for a second, because we can spend time talking about why that by itself is putting practices out of business across many, many specialties. But when in one of my former companies I used to work for, obviously on the distribution side, I remember a senior executive, Meredith, in a leadership forum, had a comment that really that I kind of took to heart and realized I could no longer work for that company. And the statement was, there is money to be made in confusion. And so when I thought about that and I said, oh my gosh, the model is opaque by design. And if it's opaque by design, how does an independent practice who's once again already competing with the hospital, PBMs, they're competing with the 340B institution. They're competing with so many different ways that they're not going to be put out of business. How are they going to be able to be successful? Because it shouldn't matter the size of the practice, whether or not you're getting the best pricing or not. Everything in a transparent way should be made available. That data, that information should be made available to everybody. Otherwise, it'll be extremely difficult for private practice across specialties to be viable.
And let's talk about price, because I'm even confused by price, and I live in this world, right? I'm looking at the cost of drug every single day. And this is where I get really frustrated. And I'd like for you to explain to those who are listening. You have a list price.
Yep.
There's a discounted price. And then there are rebates happening behind the scenes. How does that impact practices? And what the hell are they all?
Yeah, that's a really good question, which is this is fundamentally why we wanted to show kind of who's making what in the channel. So list price is set by pharma, right? It's WAC, or wholesale acquisition cost, or AWP on the pharmacy side. Average wholesale price is a list price, essentially.
But how do they figure that out?
Like how does pharma come up with it?
Yeah.
Look, I don't think there's a science behind it, but I'll tell you, when I was part of a process of one of the drugs early on in the biologic setting getting approved, they used the highest cost drug in the setting and increased it by 10%. So pharma determines it. I'm not saying like that's what RB Pharma does, but it is what is the cost right now, and because of the like R&D factors of creating these new drugs, it's more expensive. Therefore, there should be a higher cost of new drugs coming out. And immunotherapies in oncology are fantastic. They treat patients in a different way. So yeah, there should be a higher cost. But we live in a world where reimbursement is pegged to the cost of the drug. Therefore, the incentive is to have new drugs to market be higher priced. And that's essentially what they do when they create it.
And I want to jump on that, because you talking about the list price, and I'm sitting back here thinking, I have to review the list price every quarter, and I have to make buying decisions every quarter because reimbursement changes every quarter. And we're not just talking chump change. Our company collected $26 million in revenue last year. $15 million was drug.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to increase, as you know.
Yeah. And that is the world in which I live, because I'm in rheumatology. And oftentimes the list price is not given out by the pharmaceutical company until after the beginning of the new quarter. And so we're trying to figure out, can we afford it? Are we going to be upside down? Where should I purchase the drug from? Should I buy early? I like to say buy low and sell high, buy before the end of the quarter. Why are these pharmaceutical companies giving out the list price after we've all bought the drug in the new quarter? Yeah,
it's really funny that, so WAC, if you call your distributor and say, what is the WAC of this drug? What is the WAC of Actemra? What is the WAC of Remicade? Like just ask them. That should be something that should be pretty well easily made available, right? It's not. And most of your contracts, so going back to how like all the pricing works, there's the list price set by pharma, there's discounts and there's rebates the distributors give to win your business. And then there's manufacturer contracts that they give that essentially provides additional value to more than likely private practice settings, because as you know, pharma is anti-340B as well. It drastically cuts their profits too. So you look at those various channels, contract price that pharma sets, which once again is a discount from WAC or list price, is all based on list price, all based on WAC or AWP. So unless you know what AWP or WAC is, you won't know if you're getting a good contract discount or not. And so that is a fundamental, like just one of the major things that we decided had to be made completely transparent, because if you don't know what you're basing your manufacturer price increase or your contract price on, how do you know if it's going to be enough for you to make a profit or not? You won't.
So I've been doing this for almost 19 years, and only until about 18 months ago, and I'm not kidding you, and maybe other people were way ahead of the game, but I literally created a spreadsheet, like a graph that shows me each drug. The list price is X. I have the percentage of the discount.
Yep.
I have the cash pay or early payment discount. And then I have the rebate. And I include all of that. And it's the only way that I know how to purchase from a different specialty pharmacy. I have no idea what I'm paying, right? But I'm looking at the discount, the rebate, the early payment discount. There are all of these other factors. How do specialty pharmacies come up with the discounted price or the discounted percentage?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So if you think about pharma wanting you to thrive, I mean, because they make more money in the private practice setting versus almost all the hospitals, as you know, are 340B, so they're making less money there. So if you use that as like a signaling truth, then they just determine the price and they try to good pharma try to forecast what ASP will be. So if you can forecast what you think it's going to be or the kind of around the area, how much of a discount should they be giving to make sure that you're making money? That's essentially what they do. And they have lots of smart people, lots of smart analytics. But the problem is that for you to even know what your net price is, just your net price on a drug, you have to be an expert understanding all of these different factors. And once again, the biggest thing that Prism wanted to solve for and why we formed this company is any company I was at, Flatiron, when I was at HouseRx, Foundation Medicine, going back to my distribution days, when I get calls from physicians and physician offices, they were always asking me two things. How do I know I have a good distribution deal? And how do I know if my GPO contract is good or not? And you don't unless you can benchmark it against someone, against another kind of practice or what else is out there, which is why we wanted to create a model that had everything on the distribution side up front, no longer waiting on generics rebates, biosimilar rebates, volume rebates, because and they all pay them on different times. So confusing. In our model, everything is upfront. So when you buy your drug, all the distribution value is upfront. You get it right away when you buy your drug. So yes, there's a manufacturer side you got to worry about, which we can help with, but that is it. That is the next problem we're trying to solve for the manufacturer side. But at least you know, okay, consistently across all my practices, if you're a 1-doc practice or have a 35-doc practice, you are paying the same price. Why? Because we also cap the profit that a distribution company can make. So now everybody can understand that, okay, I'm getting this price, but I'm also knowing exactly how much money the channel is making on my volume, because contractually, if they make more than that, they got to rebate back my practices.
Companies who work and purchase under GPOs, group purchasing organizations, I can see where they have that ability to, whether it's a 1-doctor practice or a 200-doctor practice, they're buying under the same GPO.
Yep.
Why are rebates aligned to GPOs?
Because of a safe harbor. So when a rebate, because of its GPOs perform a bona fide fee for service and actually administer that rebate, the admin fees that pharma pays to administer these rebates actually do not go against ASP. That's how it was formed when GPOs were first formed, which, by the way, I'm not against that. You know, that's how we transparently make money, is GPO admin fees that and I cannot pass back on to a provider. So we perform the service of actually taking, and by the way, Prism is a TPO, which yes, technically we're a GPO, but we're the first transparent GPO that never existed in the specialty space. But our service that we provide is taking money from pharma that you earn and passing 100% of it back to our practices. There's a problem with that too. Without groups like us existing, there's so much time it takes from a manufacturer paying the rebate to your GPO, then getting it back to you. You're talking about 120 to 150 days of waiting, and you still have your bills. You still have paid for that drug. You may or may not have gotten reimbursed the full amount, but you're waiting on that value coming from pharma because it takes so long to go through the channel to once again get back to you. That makes no sense.
Why do pharmaceutical companies offer these rebates? Why not just lower the cost? Or I know we can't have kickbacks, right?
Yep.
We have Stark laws, but why can't the price of the drug just be lower and we have to play this game with rebates? I mean, I know hard math to a degree, right? But you almost have to know math really well to be able to figure out all of the formulas.
You do. They do it to manage ASP. So remember, rebates are counted against ASP. So they give you all the value up front. it'll artificially lower ASP, which will then affect you the next quarter. So the rationale for doing it that way, I think actually makes sense. But once again, they're just playing the game that was set up about how we're reimbursing our medical practices in the US. I think that's the fundamental change we have to make, is changing the way the reimbursement actually works, instead of, and then allowing manufacturers to say, okay, whether I do it OID or off invoice discount at point of purchase, or I do it in a rebate, it has the same effect at the same time on the reimbursement. Because you're right, then manufacturers would want to do it, and they do it in the biosimilar space. They just don't do it in the branded space, which is, yes, it's helpful, but it's not as helpful for you, because generics and biosimilars versus your brands, Meredith, I mean, 80% of what you buy are still brands, right? So
more than that, I can't even buy biosimilars because we're upside down.
Yeah.
We cannot purchase the drug for less than it is getting reimbursed to us. And if we do for maybe a year, but we know in the pipeline, because of everything going on behind the scenes and the list prices, we're going to be upside down. And I don't want to start by putting a patient on a specific drug that I know in a year I can't even deliver for them.
Yeah, that is once again not patient-centric, that you're having to do because of the system that's created, which is extremely unfortunate, which I think go back to, we have to begin by changing the way that reimbursement works, so that essentially as much value as possible. Now, Prism is only solving for the distribution and GPO optimization side. We're not solving for the manufacturer side. So I'd like to solve for both, to then get the entire value up front. So then you have the cash flow advantage rather than the GPO or the distributors that currently have the cash flow advantage.
You said that the price of drug is going to continue to go up. For me, I feel like the price of drug for me has gone up because of the number of patients coming into our practice, and that has gone up. I will tell you, very recently, I think it's probably only been in the last, 4 or 6 quarters, the list price has actually dropped for a lot of my drugs. So I would get a certain spread on the drug, and my spread has decreased because my acquisition cost hasn't dropped for as much as, or I guess the reimbursement of it hasn't dropped. There's a misalignment, right? I can think of one drug in particular that I don't want to name on this podcast, but specifically, we used to get a pretty decent spread on that drug. And I went through the process of speaking to multiple people in this pharmaceutical company to have a better understanding. My spread dropped in half, and it is a very highly utilized drug in our practice. And I can see that the list price has continued to drop and drop and drop. And the answer I got was pretty much about average selling price and ASP, and they have to realign. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because and maybe that's an anomaly in the rheumatology setting, but normally what manufacturers want to do is take manufacturer price increases to increase ASP over time, right? Because then your reimbursement goes up. If they're decreasing price, then they're decreasing ASP. So what that tells me is, once again, I don't know what the pharma company was. It's a mismanagement of ASP, because they should be managing a lot better, where they don't have to do that, because that affects your bottom line, which is a terrible thing. The last thing that they want is for you to be able to go out of business, or you to have a financial hardship because of the fact that they mismanaged their ASP.
Now let's talk about specialty drugs, which is really the most expensive part of this system. So specialty drugs make up about $265 billion in spending, and it is continuing to grow. You and I actually met a pharmaceutical rep from Organon today, and she shared with us that her company is getting acquired, and they provide a biosimilar for Humira. And I joked and said to you, I think there are 11. You're like, oh my gosh, so many more down the pipeline. But the spend is going up and up and up. What makes a drug specialty to begin with?
So it has to be, one, if you're looking at it from an insurance company perspective, oftentimes it's the cost of the drug, but it's a setting it's being used in. So is it used in a very kind of specialized therapy like oncology, like rheumatology, like urology, like neurology, where you essentially are not giving that care in the primary care setting. That's really kind of what it was originally formed to do, is not giving in the primary setting. You have to go to a specialist, and the drugs a specialist use are normally classified as specialty drugs, but I use it synonymously with very expensive drugs.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
It reaches a certain threshold and it's just a really expensive drug. What happens when a patient can't get that drug quickly? And I know that was your experience with your mom and your desire and Ogie's desire to create HouseRx to provide an option. And I share your story by the way, a lot because I sit on the advisory board and people ask me why I chose HouseRx. And I'm like, you have to like the people who founded the company. So there you go, Tesh. I like you. But going back into getting access to these drugs, we talked about the formulary. We talked about the expense. If it's not on a formulary, what can patients do to acquire these drugs besides paying out of pocket? Are there options for them?
Yeah, I mean, look, if it's not on a formulary, the only option is to not go through the insurance company but most of the drugs, especially if they're covered by Medicare, have to be on formulary. That is a good thing the government forces. It's got to be available. It doesn't have to be, they don't talk about the cost side of it. And so one of the main things that HouseRx did, which I think was revolutionary, is essentially have this team of experts. It is an army of pharmacists and pharm techs that can take on all of the administrative burdens, or the vast majority of it, for practices. So literally all you have to be able to do is say, okay, I got the approval. Let me get the right patient to the right drug at the right time, which is complicated enough. Like, there needed to be an army of people that can do that remotely. It's cheaper remotely versus you hiring it and then a oncology practice down the road hiring it. So doing it across specialties and doing it in a way where technology could actually do a lot of the work for practices. And so that's why I think we formed HouseRx to be kind of the scaled out version, to be able to learn from other specialties and then apply it across different specialties to make you guys essentially more efficient.
Is there funding for this drug, though, that is outside of the insurance company or the patient's pocket? Does the pharmaceutical company ever supplement and provide the drug for free? Are there certain requirements to be able to acquire free drug? Are there foundations that can provide money for this drug? Like, what are options for patients?
Yeah, so there's foundations and there's patient assistance programs. But once again, those are only available to non-Medicare patients. So if you're not Medicare, then yes, there is foundations and there are patient assistance programs you can get onto. But foundation monies go up quickly. As soon as you have money in a foundation, literally it's gone, oftentimes that same day. So once again, using technology to be able to help. And so I know the HouseRx technology scours foundations. When they find that there's money available, it immediately has patient backlogs and see if they can fill the patient with the foundation, because then that automatically lowers the cost for you. But if you're having someone doing that every single day across all your patients, very inefficient. But if you don't have foundation dollars and you're not eligible for patient assistance, then what else can you do except for try to get your patient on a different therapy? Which once again is what the insurance company, the system set up to do, is not get them on the therapy that they don't make the most money on, unfortunately.
Why, for Medicare patients and Medicare disadvantaged patients, why are they ineligible for this money from pharmaceutical companies?
That's a really good question. I think they should be available. They should be made available. It's just a Medicare law because of how their reimbursement works that they're just not eligible for it. And so whenever I'm sure you've seen this, but whenever you try to get any type of money, even for patient assistance for yourself or anyone else, it asks you, are you on a commercial plan? And oftentimes the insurance companies make more money on commercial plans. That's why, and there's more money kind of go around there. But it makes no sense why Medicare patients or Advantage patients don't have access to the same available funds for care that a commercial patient does. It doesn't make any sense.
Let's talk about yet another layer that challenges 340B pricing. And this is a really hot topic because this does impact the price of drug for non-340B programs, for the Hirsh Center, right, that I run, for most of the practices that you work with. 340B is primarily for hospitals. Describe what it is and why it was even implemented.
Once again, great program with great intent, implemented extremely poorly. That's really what. So the idea is that if you have a certain percentage of indigent population that cannot afford therapy, then the cost of that therapy should be lower. It's a great idea, right? I think that's a great idea. The problem is that It was made available only, the reason why hospitals are only able to get it is because there was a last minute rider put on the bill that in order to get it actually approved, that said you had to have an emergency room or access to 24-hour care. Do you have access to 24-hour care? Most practices in the private practice setting do not. Therefore, that's why hospitals have gotten it. And then you see what I call the Stanford effect. So I live in the Bay Area. Stanford is a 340B hospital. Do you know Palo Alto is actually a quite nice area? I think you've been there.
Yeah.
The reason why they are is because what's happened in the last 12 to 15 years, especially in oncology, because the cost of drugs are high, they acquired clinics in Oakland. So now you have areas that actually do have a high indigent population within a 25-mile radius. Once again, that's what the law says, owned by a entity that then now everybody is now getting access to this low cost of therapy. But once again, hospitals and treating specialty in the hospital is higher for patients. So who's making money on this? Hospitals are making a ton of money on this arbitrage. Pharma is losing money, and it's costing more for patients. So once again, the idea was great. The implementation of it was completely fumbled up by the government and or the regulations that they put in order to pass the bill.
Let's talk about the effect that it has on other medical entities. 340B pricing certainly has an impact on the Hirsh Center. Mm-hmm. How does it ripple down and have that effect on independent clinics?
Yeah, I mean, think about it if you're from a pharma perspective. You have 340B that passed. So now you essentially are losing 40% of your profits for at least half of your business. You got to make it up somewhere, right? So what pharma did over the last 10 years is essentially two things: cut cost. So they decrease in their workforce. Have you seen a lot of pharma companies do it two ways? One, just with layoffs, but two, like what you just said, Sun Pharma acquiring Organon. Like, okay, I have two companies coming together. I don't need two of everything. I can then cut costs that way as well. That's one way they're doing it. They're trying to recoup and lower their costs. But the solution to 340B, I've always said, is extremely simple. Extremely simple. 340B should just follow the patient. If I'm a 340B patient and I am an indigent patient that can't afford therapy, why does it matter if I go to the hospital or I go to the Hirsh Center? Shouldn't just follow me, and you should be able to bill against me and being a 340B patient at the Hirsh Center. If it did that, then there would be this egalitarian system where you would also benefit from it, because I chose to go to you, lower cost of care, because my patient experience was better and my out-of-pocket was going to be a lot less. Like, why don't you empower the patient?
When I first started looking into 340B pricing, I did so because it was brought to my attention that you didn't just have to be a hospital. There are other ways in which you can incorporate 340B pricing. Can you share some of those ways that people might not expect?
It's a really good question. I've only seen it in the hospital setting because you have to be a part of this DISH approval process, and so like there's been some laws that have been saying, is it a site neutral law? It actually is not. And so a lot of different companies have kind of bubbled up to say, can you offer 340B in the private practice setting? I know of a couple of them, but I have found that because the 340B law is not black or white, it's kind of gray. A lot of practices like you don't want to take that risk of actually saying, okay, I'm going to work in the gray, and then suddenly you realize that you're being kind of investigated by the government for improper, drug acquisition. This is not something that anyone wants to be able to do. So I've not seen companies be successful in it, but in theory, there should be other ways. Like, let's say you do want to have 24-hour access to care. Let's say you triage that out to an external source. If you meet all the qualifications, why wouldn't you be able to have 340B pricing? No one's really tested that.
And I was looking at that originally because it was brought to my attention. We can be affiliated with Ryan White Clinics,
Yes.
which is HIV AIDS, exactly, and serve an underserved population. I didn't know about the 24-hour access, which was really interesting for me. But what I do know is it has to be an underserved, underrepresented population. And I thought about it for a while because the highest growing population for STDs, STIs, whatever you want to call them, is the aging population. Our average patient age is 76. Anybody can go up to the villages in Florida and, hey, you'll get an STD if you just drive by. It's like crazy. So being able to offer care to patients, but it is a separate clinic. There are a lot of these rules, but you and I know people that have implemented these 340B clinics within their clinic. And we're trying to figure out how to survive. That's actually the reason behind it. What are the options for independent practices to remain independent?
That's the $1 million question. But just on your first question real quick, 340B, once again, pricing should only be eligible for the patients that fall into that indigent population. So in other words, just the patients in my Oakland example should get 340B pricing. Not everybody, but it's instituted nationwide in hospitals where everyone gets it. That's why there's so much, because why is that okay? Why is the government looking the other way? It's lower cost to them at the expense of pharma. So that's why I think why they look the other way, which is not the right thing to do, which is why they allow it to happen, which is not the intent of it, by the way. But anyways, I think what practices need to be able to do is you have to be able to understand all of the various factors that make up your revenue, and the number one source of your revenue, in my opinion, will continue and always be drugs. So how negotiations work, and Meredith, you're really good at this. You'll negotiate a pricing with your distributor, and that pricing is really, really good for that moment in time. Tomorrow, when the new brand comes out, the new biosimilar comes out, it's stale. You don't know if that pricing is good anymore because, once again, there's money to be made in confusion. We have to make sure all of the aspects of what makes up your price are transparent and, in my opinion, pre-negotiated so you can do what? Actually worry about the clinical care you're giving your patients, not worrying about, am I making the right margin versus my competition down the road, because your competition is you can, in theory, could be making more money on their drugs than you. That makes no sense. So that's honestly why I loved working at HouseRx, but that's why we decided to spin off and form Prism to essentially create this egalitarian system. Everybody has the same price because the distributor's margin is capped and it's all upfront and transparent. What does that allow me to do? It allows me to take my practice volume, go to pharma and say, treat us as one. So we are an aggregator. We sit on top of the existing GPOs and distributors that say, because we can move share, I want additional value for the Hirsh Center. And that's what we do across all of our practices. And we talk about net cost recovery. You've heard of P&T committees. We don't have a P&T committee. We have a PT&E committee. It's the E's for economics because it matters. You need to talk net cost recovery as it relates to why you're going to be using one drug over the other. So unless you have all the information and be able to maximize the fact that you're going to be always getting the best overall price by staying independent, we do it without joining an MSO, without joining a hospital. All my practices guarantee that they have the absolute best price for the entire life of their contract so they can worry about treating patients.
Insurance companies are saying that they're being transparent. I mean, I know you laugh. There's a lot of talk about it. And I love that Wendell Potter just wrote an article this morning, actually, and people can look it up. And Wendell was a guest on the podcast a couple of times, actually. And he said, well, Cigna is saying that they're transparent in their drug pricing, but are they really? And my question to you is, because you are the ultimate insider, why are they saying that they're transparent? And are they really being transparent?
They're saying well, first of all, transparency is a huge buzzword, as you know. Everybody wants to be saying that they're transparent, and they're publicly traded companies. So yeah, I can look on the financial statements and see what Cigna's margin is. But do you know how they made their margin? Do you know, if I look at United Healthcare, can I see exactly how much OptumRx is of the overall profitability? It is extremely difficult. And you have analysts that look at this on a daily basis. That, yeah, in theory, because they're making everything publicly available, they're saying they're transparent. But how they're actually driving that horizontal integration, controlling the physician flow, and then owning the drug flow, they're not telling you how much they're making along each way, so you know whether or not you're getting a good deal. So they're just not.
So let's go back to the beginning. Where does the money go? Like, who is actually getting the money in our $5.3 trillion a year healthcare system?
It is the middlemen and the services providers that sit between you and the patient that is essentially getting a lot of this value. And I'm a capitalist. I think that's fine. Once again, it should be okay for companies to make money. As a shareholder, it should be okay. But I think you can do that in a way that's transparent. It's okay for me to say that, and all of my practices know this, my distributor can't make more than 50 basis points or 0.5%. I think that's okay to say that. It's the distributor saying, I need to make something, otherwise I can't pick, pack, and ship drugs to you. So I give them credit for being able to and wanting to do this. But then you see situations where they only want to do it for certain areas. Like, I'm trying to take this model across specialties. I want this to be the ubiquitous model across every single community practice across specialty. And then you find challenges because when parts of these middlemen own other services or other physician groups, other services, and they work with other kind of owned entities, there's a conflict of interest saying, oh, I want transparency here, but I don't want it to exist elsewhere. That, in my opinion, is not right.
And you're in the oncology space right now, and you're in the GI space right now. Why are you getting kickback specifically in the rheumatology world?
It's because of the economics are different, which I fully understand. But that, in my opinion, you solve that very simply. And you should just basically say that the gross margin guarantee is different. So like maybe the economics mean that in rheumatology it's 1%. I'm making it up because the mix of drugs is different. That's fine. That should still translate to something that I should be able to do an analysis for you that said, okay, this is worth it for you or not, because I will never tell you to join and say you're going to be buying the vast majority of your drugs anywhere unless I know that the economics are strong and will continue to be strong. But they're doing it because oftentimes different distributors own different entities in different specialties. And so then you have a little bit of a conflict of interest where one might want to do it in rheumatology, but not wanting to do it in another specialty. But I'm bullish that that's going to change because because of when we launched Prism 14 months ago, no one thought it would be growing this fast, this quickly. And now the norm in oncology is upfront pricing. The norm now has become, you gotta tell your customers how much money you're making. And that happened in 14 months. So if the market is shifting that way, I'm bullish, Meredith, that I can come back to you in a few months and say, I got something to see whether or not it's going to work for the Hirsh Center.
Well, I'm positive, and I harass you every month. Every month you're on my text. Tesh, where are we at now? And you're like, Meredith, I should know something in 2 or 3 weeks. And then I harass you in 2 or 3 weeks. You're like, I need another 2 or 3 weeks. I'm like, well, let's wait till he comes down and we'll have this conversation. So now I'm hearing 2 months. If you could create one change within this American healthcare system to create support for physicians and patients, what would that one change be?
Anytime you change the economics for the system, you should have to prove that it lowers the cost for patients. Simple. So if you take a manufacturer price increase, pharma, you have to show how that's going to be better for the patient. If you can't show that, you can't do it. I know that's kind of anti-capitalist in a way. I'm not talking about a communist system, but what I am saying is that that's putting the patient first. And by proxy, if you put the patient first, who are you also putting first? The provider. And so if you do that and say that you've got to show why it's better for patients, and you can show that, great, then you can implement that change. If you can't do it.
Tesh Khullar, thank you for joining me on Working Healthcare. If this conversation hit home or made you think a little differently, don't keep it to yourself. Share the episode, tag a friend, or post about it on social media. Connect with me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going in between episodes. If you've got a question, an episode idea, or someone you think I should feature, send me a note at meredithhirsh.com. Thank you all for the 5-star reviews. They help more listeners find the show. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Tune in weekly as we explore the inner workings of healthcare, because you can't fix what you don't understand.